They laughed when a homeless veteran inherited a mansion in the desert. They thought he had received nothing but an empty house full of dust. They never knew that behind those old walls was a secret worth millions, and the only one who could find it was the German shepherd who never left his side. Caleb Harrison had stopped expecting miracles a long time ago. At 52 years old, he had learned how to live with uncertainty. His old pickup truck was his shelter. His worn jacket was his daily companion. The desert roads of Arizona had become familiar, with endless skies above him and quiet mornings that carried more memories than conversations. To most people, Caleb looked like a man who had lost everything. They saw a homeless veteran. They did not see the years he spent serving his country, the sacrifices he made, or the quiet strength that remained after life became difficult. The only one who never judged him was Ranger. The German shepherd walked beside Caleb through every sunrise and every cold night. Ranger did not care about what Caleb owned or where he slept. He only knew one thing. Caleb was his person. One afternoon, while Caleb was repairing a small part on his truck outside a roadside station, a stranger approached him with an envelope. The man introduced himself as an attorney and asked if Caleb Harrison was the same person listed in an old inheritance document. Caleb almost laughed. An inheritance was the kind of thing that happened to other people, not someone like him. There must be a mistake, Caleb said quietly. But there was no mistake. Inside the envelope were legal documents confirming that Caleb had inherited a desert mansion located several miles outside a small Arizona town. The property had belonged to Daniel Whitmore, a former veteran who had passed away without close family. Caleb had never met the man. He had no idea why someone he did not know would leave him a house. When the news reached the town, people reacted exactly as Caleb expected. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. They said the mansion had been abandoned for years. They said the desert had already taken it back. They said a man who had been sleeping in a truck would not know what to do with a place like that. Caleb listened, but said nothing. He had learned that people often judged what they could see and ignored what they could not. A few days later, Caleb and Ranger arrived at the property. The mansion stood alone in the middle of the desert, surrounded by dry land and endless silence. The walls were faded by years of sunlight. Dust covered the windows. The front gate moved slowly in the desert wind. But as Caleb stepped closer, something about the place felt different. It did not feel abandoned. It felt like it was waiting. Ranger walked beside him, carefully exploring the area. The German shepherd paused near the entrance and looked toward the house as if he sensed something Caleb could not. Inside, the mansion was frozen in time. Old furniture covered with sheets. Family photographs left behind. Books resting on dusty shelves. Every room carried a piece of a life that had ended years earlier. Caleb moved slowly, respecting the memories inside the walls. He was not looking for riches. He was simply trying to understand why this place had become his. As the afternoon sun disappeared behind the desert mountains, Ranger suddenly stopped near a hallway at the back of the mansion. The dog lowered his head and stared at the wooden floor beneath him. Caleb walked closer. "What did you find, boy?" Ranger did not bark. He simply remained there, focused on a small section of the floor that looked slightly different from the rest. Caleb brushed away the dust and noticed a strange mark carved into the wood. It was an old symbol, a symbol that appeared to have been hidden for a very long time. Caleb looked around the silent mansion. The house everyone laughed about was beginning to reveal another story. And Ranger had just found the first clue. The strange symbol carved into the wooden floor stayed in Caleb Harrison's mind long after the sun disappeared behind the desert mountains. The mansion was silent, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like every room was holding a memory, waiting for someone to finally listen. Ranger remained beside Caleb as he carefully examined the mark. The German shepherd did not move away. He simply watched, patient and calm, as if he understood that this small discovery mattered. Caleb searched the area around the symbol and found a thin line hidden beneath layers of dust. It was not a crack in the wood. It was the outline of something carefully placed there years ago. With gentle hands, Caleb lifted the old wooden panel and discovered a small compartment underneath. Inside was a leather folder wrapped in faded cloth. There was no gold, no jewelry, no obvious treasure. Instead, there were old photographs, handwritten letters, and a military dog tag resting on top. Caleb picked up the tag and looked closely. The name belonged to Daniel Whitmore, the man who had left him the mansion. For the first time, Caleb felt connected to the person behind the inheritance. Daniel was not just a stranger who owned a house in the desert. He was someone with a story. Caleb sat down on the dusty floor and opened the first letter. The handwriting was careful and steady. Daniel wrote about his years after leaving the military. He wrote about how difficult it could be for veterans to find their place again after service. He wrote about friends who struggled quietly and people who felt invisible after returning home. Caleb stopped reading for a moment. Those words felt familiar. He knew what it was like to feel unseen. He knew what it was like when the world only noticed what was missing and ignored what remained. Ranger rested his head against Caleb's shoulder, bringing him back to the present. Inside the folder was a photograph of Daniel standing outside the mansion many years earlier. Beside him were several other veterans. They were smiling, standing together like family. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten note. A home is not built with walls. It is built with the people who refuse to let others stand alone. Caleb read the sentence twice. The mansion suddenly felt different. It was not just a building. It was a place created around an idea. As he continued reading, Caleb discovered that Daniel had spent years helping veterans who had nowhere else to turn. The mansion had once been a gathering place where people shared meals, conversations, and support. But over time, the stories disappeared. The property was forgotten. The people moved on. Until now. Caleb looked around the room and imagined the voices that once filled the halls. He imagined veterans sitting together, sharing memories, reminding each other that they still mattered. For the first time in years, Caleb did not feel like an outsider. He felt like he had walked into a place where someone understood him before they ever met him. The next morning, Caleb visited the town library to learn more about Daniel Whitmore. He found old newspaper articles describing Daniel as a quiet man who helped others without seeking attention. People remembered his kindness, but few knew the full story behind his work. While Caleb was looking through old records, Ranger suddenly became alert near a shelf of local history books. The German Shepherd moved toward a small box that had fallen behind the shelves. Caleb carefully picked it up and noticed the same symbol from the mansion carved into the side. Inside was another letter. This one was different. It was addressed directly to whoever discovered the hidden compartment. Caleb opened it slowly. The first sentence made him stop breathing for a moment. If you found this room, then you were never meant to inherit a house. You were meant to continue a mission. Caleb looked down at Ranger. The German Shepherd quietly stood beside him. The mansion's secret was becoming clearer. It was never about receiving something. It was about becoming someone who could carry it forward. The words written inside Daniel Whitmore's letter stayed with Caleb Harrison long after he left the library. You were never meant to inherit a house. You were meant to continue a mission. The sentence felt heavier than any key, any document, or any amount of money could ever feel. Caleb had spent years believing that his life was defined by what he had lost. His home, his stability, his place in the world. But now, inside a forgotten mansion in the middle of the desert, someone from the past was telling him that maybe he had not been forgotten at all. Ranger walked beside him as they returned to the property that evening. The desert wind moved across the land, carrying dust through the empty roads. The German Shepherd looked ahead, calm and focused, just as he had from the beginning. Caleb knew Ranger could not understand the letters or the history behind the mansion. But somehow, the dog always seemed to know when something mattered. Inside the mansion, Caleb placed the letter beside the old photographs and began organizing everything he had discovered. He wanted to understand Daniel Whitmore's mission before making any decisions. The more he learned, the clearer the picture became. Daniel had not built a place for himself. He had built a place for people who needed someone to believe in them. Among the documents was a journal filled with names, dates, and handwritten notes. Each entry told a different story. A veteran who needed a temporary place to stay. A family who needed support during a difficult season. A person who simply needed someone to listen. Caleb slowly turned each page. These were not records of wealth. They were records of kindness. Near the back of the journal, Caleb found a page marked with the same symbol from the hidden compartment. The note explained that Daniel had created a private foundation years earlier. Its purpose was simple: to use the mansion and surrounding land to help veterans rebuild their lives. But there was something unusual. The foundation had never been officially completed. Daniel had stopped the process before his passing. Caleb wondered why. Then he found another letter. This one explained everything. Daniel had been waiting for someone who understood struggle, not someone who only wanted the value of the property. He wanted the next person to know what it felt like to need a second chance. Caleb looked around the mansion. The faded walls, the empty rooms, the quiet hallways. Suddenly, the abandoned house did not seem broken. It seemed unfinished. The next morning, Caleb met with a local historian named Sarah Collins, who had helped him research Daniel's past. When she saw the documents from the hidden compartment, she immediately recognized their importance. Most people would have looked for money, Sarah said, but you kept looking for answers. Caleb looked down. He was not sure why he kept searching. Maybe because Daniel's story felt familiar. Maybe because he knew what it meant to be judged before anyone knew the truth. Sarah helped Caleb examine the property records and discovered something surprising. Beneath the mansion was a section of land that had been part of Daniel's original plan. It was meant to become a retreat for veterans who needed a place to recover and reconnect. But one final document was missing. Without it, the plan could not move forward. As they searched through the mansion, rangers suddenly stopped near an old study at the back of the house. The German shepherd looked toward a large wooden desk covered in dust. Caleb walked over and opened the drawers one by one. Most were empty, but the final drawer had a hidden compartment. Inside was a small envelope with Daniel's handwriting. Caleb opened it carefully. The message inside was short. The person who finds this must choose between owning the mansion or sharing its purpose. Caleb sat quietly with the letter in his hands. Outside, the desert sun lowered behind the mountains. The choice was no longer about what he inherited. It was about who he wanted to become. The letter from Daniel Whitmore remained on Caleb Harrison's desk for several days. The words were simple, but the choice they presented felt larger than anything he had faced before. Choose between owning the mansion or sharing its purpose. Caleb had spent most of his life trying to hold on to what little he had. Now, for the first time, he had something valuable in his hands. But the strange thing was, he did not feel excited about owning it. He felt responsible for protecting what it represented. Rangers stayed near him, as always, quietly observing the changes around the mansion. The German shepherd had become part of every discovery, every unanswered question, and every moment when Caleb needed a reminder that he was not alone. Caleb knew the dog was not leading him toward money. Ranger was leading him toward meaning. With Sarah Collins helping him research the missing documents, Caleb began searching every room of the mansion. They carefully examined old cabinets, shelves, and storage areas that had not been touched in years. The house slowly revealed more pieces of Daniel's plan. In a small office upstairs, they found blueprints showing how the property was supposed to be transformed. The mansion was never meant to be a private luxury home. It was designed as a place where veterans could rest, reconnect, and rebuild their confidence after difficult chapters in life. Caleb studied the plans quietly. He knew that feeling. The feeling of returning home, but not knowing where you belonged. The feeling of carrying memories that others could not see. Sarah noticed his expression. Daniel knew someone like you would understand this, she said. Caleb looked away. He was not used to people believing in him. For years, he had become comfortable being underestimated. It was easier to accept low expectations than to risk disappointing someone. But this place was asking him to believe in something again. While searching through Daniel's old office, Ranger walked toward a bookshelf near the corner of the room. The German shepherd stopped beside a row of old books and looked back at Caleb. Behind the books, Caleb found a small wooden panel hidden in the wall. Inside was a sealed envelope and an old key. The envelope contained another message from Daniel. This time, it was not instructions. It was a personal letter. Daniel wrote about the years he spent watching veterans struggle silently after leaving service. He wrote that many people did not need someone to solve every problem. They needed someone to remind them they were still valuable. Caleb read the letter slowly. Every sentence felt connected to his own journey. Daniel had never met him, but somehow he understood him. The key found inside the wall opened a small room beneath the mansion. When Caleb and Sarah entered, they discovered shelves filled with old records, photographs, and financial documents. Among them was the information everyone had been searching for. Daniel's hidden investments, property rights, and assets connected to the mansion were worth millions of dollars. The estimated value reached nearly $6.7 million. Sarah looked at Caleb in disbelief. Do you realize what this means? Caleb looked around the room. He saw the records, the memories, the purpose behind everything Daniel created. Yes, he said quietly, but I do not think this was ever about the money. Outside the mansion, word spread quickly that the abandoned desert property had a hidden fortune connected to it. The same people who once laughed at Caleb began asking questions. Some wanted to know how he found it. Others wanted to know what he planned to do next. But Caleb did not focus on their opinions. He had already made his decision. That evening, he sat outside with Ranger as the desert sky filled with stars. The German shepherd rested beside him, peaceful and loyal. Caleb placed a hand on the dog's back and whispered, "I think I finally understand why we found this place." The mansion had given him more than a home. It had given him a chance to help others who felt forgotten. But before Caleb could begin that new chapter, a message arrived from an unknown sender. It contained only one sentence. "Daniel Whitmore left you the mansion, but someone else is trying to take it away." The message from the unknown sender stayed on Caleb Harrison's mind throughout the night. "Daniel Whitmore left you the mansion, but someone else is trying to take it away." The words carried a quiet warning, but Caleb refused to let fear decide what happened next. He had spent too many years allowing circumstances to control his life. This time was different. The mansion was no longer just a property. It was a promise. The next morning, Caleb met with Sarah Collins to understand what was happening. She helped him review the inheritance documents again and discovered that several old claims had recently appeared connected to the land. Someone had noticed the value of the property and was questioning whether Daniel's final wishes should be honored. Caleb listened carefully, but his mind was not focused on the money. He kept thinking about Daniel's letters and the reason behind the mansion. It was built to help people, not to create another fight over ownership. Ranger sat beside Caleb during the meeting, quietly watching every movement in the room. The German shepherd had become a reminder of patience. He never rushed. He never reacted out of fear. He simply stayed loyal to the path in front of him. Sarah discovered the name connected to the claim. It belonged to Victor Lawson, a distant relative of someone who had once worked with Daniel. Victor believed the mansion and its assets should belong to his family. He argued that Daniel had no right to leave such valuable property to someone he barely knew. Caleb understood why people questioned the situation. From the outside, it looked strange. A homeless veteran receiving a desert mansion worth millions sounded impossible. But Caleb also knew the truth hidden beneath the surface. Daniel had not chosen him because of his bank account or his background. He had chosen him because he understood what it meant to need another chance. Caleb decided to meet Victor in person. He did not want a conflict. He wanted understanding. When they met at the mansion, Victor looked around at the old walls and faded rooms. He admitted that he had never seen the place as anything more than an asset. Caleb looked at the photographs of veterans hanging in the hallway. Daniel saw something different, Caleb said quietly. He saw people. Victor did not respond immediately. For a moment, the mansion became silent. Then Ranger walked toward an old display cabinet near the entrance. The German shepherd stopped and looked at a small wooden box inside. Caleb carefully opened the cabinet and found the box hidden behind old photographs. Inside was a collection of documents that had never been discovered before. Among them was a letter written by Daniel specifically about the future of the mansion. The letter explained that the property was meant to remain a place of support and hope. Daniel had expected questions. He had expected people to focus on the value of the land. That was why he had hidden one final message. The person who inherited the mansion would need to prove they understood the purpose behind it. Caleb read the letter aloud. A home is not measured by its size or value. It is measured by the lives changed inside it. Victor listened quietly. The words seemed to affect him more than he expected. He looked around the room again, but this time he was not seeing old furniture and expensive property. He was seeing the people who had once gathered there, the stories that had been protected, the lives that had been changed. Later that evening, Caleb stood outside the mansion with Ranger as the desert wind moved across the land. The legal questions were not finished yet, but something important had changed. The truth was finally becoming visible. The secret hidden inside the mansion was not only about the $6.7 million. It was about why Daniel trusted Caleb with something so valuable. And now Caleb had to decide how far he was willing to go to protect that legacy. The days after Victor Lawson discovered Daniel Whitmore's final letter felt different inside the desert mansion. The silence remained. The old wooden floors still carried years of dust, and the desert wind still moved through the empty halls. But something had changed. The house no longer felt like a forgotten place. It felt like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Caleb Harrison spent each morning studying Daniel's records and each evening walking through the property with Ranger. The German Shepherd had become part of the mansion's story, always appearing at the right moment, always reminding Caleb that patience mattered more than fear. The legal challenge surrounding the inheritance continued, but Caleb refused to let it become a battle about money. He wanted the truth to be known. He wanted Daniel's dream to survive. Sarah Collins helped Caleb organize the documents found inside the hidden room. Together, they discovered more details about Daniel's plans. The mansion was connected to a larger piece of land that Daniel had carefully preserved for years. His vision was to create a place where veterans could find support, learn new skills, and feel like they belonged again. Caleb looked at the old blueprints spread across the table. He imagined the empty rooms filled with conversations again. He imagined people walking through the halls without feeling alone. For someone who had spent years searching for a place to belong, the idea felt powerful. One afternoon, Caleb received another unexpected visit. This time it was not from a lawyer or someone questioning the inheritance. It was from several people who had known Daniel personally. They had heard that the mansion had a new owner and wanted to see if the stories were true. An older veteran named Thomas Reed arrived carrying an old photograph. He showed Caleb a picture of Daniel standing outside the mansion with a group of veterans many years earlier. He always said this place would find the right person, Thomas explained. Caleb looked at the photograph carefully. Why did he believe that, he asked. Thomas smiled softly. Because Daniel knew people. He knew that someone who had never struggled would never understand why this place mattered. Those words stayed with Caleb. He realized Daniel had not chosen him despite his difficult past. He had chosen him because of it. Later that day, Caleb walked through the mansion with Ranger. The German Shepherd suddenly stopped near the old library. He looked beneath a wooden table where a small piece of paper was partially visible. Caleb reached down and pulled it out. It was another note from Daniel. This one was not hidden with money or legal documents. It was hidden where only someone who truly explored the house would find it. The note contained a simple message. The greatest treasures are often found by those who know what it feels like to search. Caleb sat quietly for a moment. He thought about his journey, the years when people looked past him, the moments when he felt invisible, the nights when Ranger was the only living soul beside him. Somehow, every difficult road had brought him here. The mansion was not just a gift from a stranger. It was a reminder that every person still had value, even when the world stopped seeing it. As the sun began to set over the desert, Caleb made a decision. He would not fight to keep the mansion for himself. He would fight to protect what Daniel created. The next morning, Caleb and Sarah prepared the final documents needed to establish the Veteran Support Foundation Daniel had imagined. But before they could complete the process, another discovery changed everything. Inside Daniel's old office, hidden behind a framed photograph, was a document that revealed the true reason Daniel chose Caleb. And it was connected to a promise made many years earlier. The document hidden behind Daniel Whitmore's old photograph changed the way Caleb Harrison saw everything. For weeks, he believed the mansion was a second chance given to him by a stranger. But as he unfolded the worn paper and read the words written decades earlier, he realized there was a deeper connection waiting to be discovered. The desert outside remained quiet, but inside the old office, the past was finally speaking. The document was not a legal agreement. It was a personal letter from Daniel to someone he had never forgotten. Caleb read the first few lines slowly, then stopped when he saw a familiar name. His own family name. For a moment, the room felt completely still. Daniel Whitmore had known Caleb's father many years before. They had served together and remained close friends after leaving the military. Caleb had heard stories about his father's service, but he had never known the full details. His father rarely spoke about those years. The letter explained that Daniel watched from a distance as Caleb's life became difficult. He knew about the challenges Caleb faced after losing his home and struggling to find direction. Daniel never contacted him because he believed some journeys had to be discovered naturally. He believed that when Caleb finally found the mansion, he would understand why it mattered. Caleb lowered the letter and looked around the office. The mansion was not randomly given to him. It was a bridge connecting two generations of veterans who understood sacrifice, change, and starting over. Ranger quietly walked closer and rested beside Caleb's chair. The German Shepherd seemed to sense the emotion in the room. Caleb placed his hand on Ranger's head and took a deep breath. For years, he wondered why life had taken so much away from him. Now he was beginning to understand that some things were removed to make space for something new. With the new information, Caleb and Sarah reviewed the remaining documents. They discovered that Daniel had prepared everything carefully. The $6.7 million in assets was not meant to create personal wealth. It was designed to support the foundation Daniel had dreamed about. The mansion, the land, and the resources all had one purpose: helping people who felt forgotten. Caleb knew exactly what that felt like. As the story spread through the town, the people who once laughed began seeing Caleb differently. They saw the man who walked through the desert with a loyal German shepherd. They saw someone who could have kept everything but chose to share it. One afternoon, several local veterans visited the mansion. They walked through the halls where Daniel had once welcomed others. They shared memories and stories about a man who believed small acts of kindness could change someone's entire future. Caleb listened quietly. He realized Daniel's greatest achievement was never the property itself. It was the number of lives touched by the kindness that happened inside those walls. Later that evening, Caleb sat outside with Ranger as the desert sky turned orange and gold. The same place that once looked empty now felt alive with possibility. He looked at the mansion in the distance and thought about the road that brought him there. The truck, the lonely nights, the judgment from strangers. Every difficult moment had become part of a story he never expected to live. But there was still one final mystery. While reviewing Daniel's original plans, Sarah discovered a missing section that had never been found. It contained the final instructions for completing the foundation. And according to Daniel's notes, only one person could decide whether his dream would truly continue. Caleb opened the final envelope carefully. Inside was a single sentence: "The future of this place depends not on what you inherit, but on what you are willing to give." Caleb looked toward Ranger as the wind moved across the desert. The answer had been waiting all along. The mansion was never asking him to become wealthy. It was asking him to become a reason for someone else to hope. The morning sun rose over the Arizona desert, casting warm golden light across the mansion that had once been forgotten. For Caleb Harrison, the place no longer felt like an abandoned building surrounded by empty land. It felt like a promise that was finally coming alive. The old walls still carried years of silence, but now they were filled with voices, footsteps, and memories being created again. Ranger walked through the halls beside Caleb, his paws moving softly across the wooden floors. The German shepherd had been there from the beginning. He had stood beside Caleb when the mansion was only a mystery, when the future was uncertain, and when the world still doubted him. Now, he watched as the place transformed into something meaningful. With Daniel Whitmore's final instructions discovered, Caleb began the process of restoring the mansion's purpose. He did not want to change the character of the house. He wanted to protect its history. Every room was carefully cleaned while keeping the old photographs, letters, and memories that told Daniel's story. The goal was not to create something new. It was to bring back something that had been waiting for years. Sarah Collins helped Caleb establish the foundation Daniel had dreamed about. The paperwork was complicated, but every step brought them closer to turning the mansion into a place where veterans could find support. Caleb spent long days organizing plans, meeting with community members, and listening to stories from people who understood the importance of having somewhere to belong. Many veterans arrived carrying their own quiet struggles. Some had lost confidence. Some felt disconnected from the world around them. Caleb recognized those feelings because he had carried them himself. He did not pretend to have every answer. He simply offered what Daniel had offered before him, a place where people were seen. One afternoon, a group of visitors arrived at the mansion. They were veterans who had known Daniel years earlier. They walked through the rooms slowly, remembering the moments they shared there. One man stopped near the old fireplace and smiled. "Daniel always said this house would find its way back to helping people," he said. Caleb looked around the room and realized the mansion had never truly belonged to one person. It belonged to every person who found hope inside it. Outside, Ranger explored the restored garden area behind the house. He moved calmly between the paths, occasionally looking back at Caleb as if making sure he was still there. The connection between them had never been about commands or training. It was built on trust, the same trust that helped Caleb continue when life felt impossible. As the weeks passed, the people in town began to see the truth. The man they once laughed at had not received a lucky escape. He had received a responsibility. The homeless veteran they underestimated had become the person protecting a legacy built on compassion. But Caleb never cared about proving anyone wrong. He cared about proving Daniel right. One evening, Caleb sat outside the mansion with Ranger beside him. The desert sky slowly changed colors as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. He held Daniel's old journal in his hands and read the final pages again. There was one entry he had not noticed before. It was written only a few days before Daniel passed away. The message was short but powerful. The greatest reward is knowing someone else will continue the kindness you started. Caleb closed the journal and looked toward the lights of the mansion behind him. For the first time in many years, he felt completely at home. But just as everything seemed peaceful, Sarah arrived with unexpected news. While reviewing the final property records, she discovered a hidden detail that could change everything. Daniel had left one more secret behind, and this time, it was not hidden inside the mansion. It was connected to someone from Caleb's own past. The hidden detail inside the final property records changed everything Caleb Harrison thought he knew about Daniel Whitmore's last days. For months, Caleb believed the mansion was the greatest gift Daniel had left behind. The land, the resources, the opportunity to help others. But the final discovery revealed something even more meaningful. It revealed that Daniel's greatest hope had always been connected to a promise made long before Caleb ever stepped through the mansion doors. Sarah Collins arrived that evening carrying a small folder of documents. Her expression was different. Not worried, not afraid, just surprised by what she had found. Inside the records was a letter written years earlier by Caleb's father. Caleb looked at the paper quietly, recognizing the handwriting immediately. It was a letter he had never seen before. His father had written it to Daniel after their years of service together. The letter spoke about friendship, sacrifice, and the importance of helping those who felt forgotten. Caleb read every word slowly. His father had always believed that no person should be defined by their hardest moment. Daniel had carried that belief forward. And now, somehow, the same message had reached Caleb. The mansion was not simply passed from one person to another. It was a chain of kindness that continued across generations. Caleb sat outside that night with Ranger beside him. The desert was calm. The stars stretched across the sky, and the quiet wind moved gently through the land. He thought about the years when he believed his story was already finished. He remembered the moments when he felt invisible. He remembered sleeping in his truck and wondering if anyone would ever notice. But then he looked at Ranger, the German shepherd who stayed beside him when there was nothing to gain, the companion who never judged him by his circumstances. Caleb finally understood that sometimes people lose everything because they are being guided towards something they never expected to find. The next morning, Caleb made his final decision. He officially dedicated the mansion and its resources to Daniel's original vision. The property would become a place where veterans could find support, connection, and a reminder that they still mattered. He kept the history of the house alive, preserving Daniel's photographs, journals, and memories so future visitors would understand why the place existed. The town watched as the mansion changed. The same people who once laughed at Caleb began volunteering. They saw the truth that had been hidden behind their assumptions. The man they underestimated had become someone who gave hope to others. But Caleb never forgot where he came from. He never forgot what it felt like to be overlooked. That was why he treated every person who arrived at the mansion with patience and respect. Because he knew that sometimes one small act of kindness could change the direction of an entire life. Months later, the mansion looked completely different. The empty rooms were filled with conversations. The forgotten halls carried new memories. The desert property that once seemed abandoned had become a place of belonging. And every morning, Ranger walked beside Caleb through the grounds, just as he had from the very beginning. One evening, Caleb stood near the old entrance where he first discovered the hidden symbol beneath the floor. He placed his hand on the wooden surface and smiled. The secret hidden inside the mansion was never just the value of the property. It was the reminder that people are worth more than their circumstances. Daniel had left behind a fortune, but the true treasure was the kindness he planted in others. Caleb looked at Ranger as the sun disappeared behind the desert mountains. The German shepherd quietly sat beside him, watching the horizon. Some stories are remembered because of what was found. Others are remembered because of what was changed. And in that quiet moment, Caleb finally understood the greatest inheritance was never the mansion. It was the chance to make sure no one felt forgotten again.